And the music wasn't terrible. I don't know that it was amazing either at that point. I don't know how great my demo was. Now that I am, in all honesty, it was probably fine. But but with no relationship, fine is going to get you nowhere, especially a fine cold call, because you're going to get whatever. So the one thing that I think Austin and I both believe in, and that's why we have the agent we have and all that kind of stuff, is like, if you can find a way to stand out, do it. Nice drum kit, dude.
No, thanks. It's got all these mesh heads since I live in an apartment, so it's really quiet. And I got these cymbals that have a bunch of holes in them to kind of like reduce the volume and stuff. So it allows me to practice in an apartment without being obnoxious.
Less complaints from neighbors.
Yeah.
What city are you in?
I'm in Chicago.
Nice. Whereabouts?
Kind of northwest side a little bit, so still within the city, not in the suburbs, but yeah.
Got it. My dad's side of the family was from over there. My grandmother lived in Northbrook, and my uncle lives on Schiller, up near the lake.
Okay.
Kind of like near Gold Coast, but not in Gold Coast. Somewhere.
Oh, okay, I got you. Yeah, I'm kind of northwest side, so I'm just slightly west of the 9094.
Okay, sure.
About
Nice.
10 minutes, pretty much about 12 minutes directly west of Wrigley Field.
Oh,
So,
got it. I know where you are.
yeah.
Awesome.
A city I have spent zero time in.
Oh, it's a great city.
It is a great city.
I every time I pass through the airport and I have to walk past the T-Rex, I think I need to come here more. And
You should check it out.
yeah. Well, here's what we have on deck for today. Jeremy, and actually another guy who isn't able to be here, so basically just going to play back his stuff and we'll just talk about it. And,
Without him here? Oh, we can be merciless then.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, you might remember him. It's our dear pal online, Adonis.
Of course.
Who lives in Greece and was basically like, I suspect the time difference is going to make this near impossible. And and the funny thing is, all this traces back to this Kickstarter that I did approximately 400 years ago. And the funny thing is that he backed it just to be a friend, essentially. And so when it came time to actually sort of say, hey, well, you still want to do this thing? Because the funny thing is, he's quite a busy working composer, mostly focusing on the library world. And so I said, I feel kind of funny about it. But if you want, we'll do it. So he said, I'll send you a piece. You can say whatever you want. So I'll play it back when we finish up with Jeremy's, and then
Great.
And then that'll be that. All right. So the way I'd like to kick this off is what would be helpful, Jeremy, is if you could give us a sense of what you are essentially looking for, because everybody comes at this with something different that they feel like they need, whether it's, obvious examples would be like production chops. That's a very common, just how's the mix, how's the use of samples, how's the this, that, or the other. But sometimes it's also, I've been really focusing the last year on melody, and this is sort of the result of that. I'm curious how it reads, or whatever, or if it's open-ended. But I like to try to listen through a lens so I can be most useful potentially, instead of just randomly firing from the hip.
I think that my biggest question wasn't necessarily on like production value or anything like that. It was mostly kind of about, honestly, just kind of getting your first gig, because there had been a couple of things that I had done where I'd read through multiple different books about, video game production stuff, and kind of like, one guy suggested, doing like cold emails to like different companies. And he says, a lot of my time is spent doing that, where I'll send 100 emails to, 100 different companies talking about, like sharing my portfolio and whatever. And I might hear back from 10 of them. And out of those 10 that I hear back from, 1 or 2 might actually be a job. And so I had tried doing that. I checked out different websites for, different companies when I lived in Arizona. And I even tried, game dev classifieds on Reddit, because there are some opportunities that would arise there. But like one of the biggest things is that there's kind of an oversaturation of people who like are composers for video game music. And some of it's just people, who like tinkering around with GarageBand or, Cubase or something, and they like kind of like messing around with it. So then these people would kind of be like, well, I'll go ahead and score your video game for free, because they're trying to get experience. And so it's hard to compete with that for like an indie company who's like, well, yeah, I'm definitely going to take that over somebody who wants some rev share or needs to actually be paid because, they have enough experience under the belt. So one of the projects that I had signed up for, I composed a bunch of different tracks for, and it fell through. The guy who was trying to produce it. And so it was just kind of exhausting, like spending all this time on this project and stuff, and then having it fall through, and then other opportunities where I tried to get in contact with people. So it's like, that's kind of my biggest question. What is the most reliable way of actually kind of, getting that first gig, whether it's with an indie company or anything like that? So, because Austin, your first game for Journey, that was through a classmate, correct?
Well,
or somebody that you knew already.
Crucially, Journey wasn't my first project, but that's an interesting, you kind of perfectly teed me up to answer that, because anytime a composer seemingly comes from nowhere, you don't know the 10 years before that of them laying those bricks. That's time and time again. Film comes out, game comes out, TV show, and I go, who the hell is that? And you picture this mythologized thing of some person sitting at home and getting that Willy Wonka phone call. But in reality, there's always this long daisy chain of events that they can walk you through that has led to them having that opportunity. And it almost always is, oh, well, I was friends with that producer for 10 years, but they never had the political capital on a project to recommend me until their career reached that point. And then it was right place, right time, or whatever. There's a million stories that all seem to have that in common. In my case, yes, I was at USC and I met it's actually funny. It's one of those weird things where I can trace back the entirety of my career can rest on a single moment where I made a weird impulsive decision. And because I was at a concert that was one of these cheesy, every composition student had to be in some ensemble. And for the composers like me that were not these virtuosos on some instrument, there was the auditionless dregs of a choir that we all could sing in. It's just like, hey, you have vocal cords, go sing. And it satisfied the degree requirement. And so I was in, it was all basically all the other guys it was a men's choir, non-audition, and virtually all the rest were also composers. Like I think Bob Lidecker was in that same choir, and he's kind of had a perfect example also lately of, he joined Brian Tyler's camp, and that led to some spectacular career opportunities, and now he's crushing it in TV. So point being, I remember I had to perform in one of these shitty men's choir concerts. And I look, and there's a guy in the audience. There's like an actual civilian, who's not in the choir and not in because we would share the concert with the women's choir, who was our counterpart of the non-audition, like for all the people who had to satisfy the degree requirement as well. So the concert was the men sit in the audience, the women perform, and then we switch. And now we've all right, we've performed. We put on a concert, but there was an actual guy there. So being I'm the same guy that strikes up unwelcome conversations to the stranger next to me on an airplane. Being that guy, I went and sat in this sea of empty seats. I went and sat next to this guy. It was like, who are you? Why are you here? No one comes to these concerts.
What are you doing here?
Yeah. And that guy was in the inaugural class of USC's game design program that I did not know existed. So I whip out my card and I'm like, dude, I'm a fucking diehard gamer. I've always loved what games are you into? Blah, blah, blah. We had this whole conversation, and he, sure enough, we hung out a few times. He called me. I scored his, meager little student games. And then like a month later, a classmate of his said, I'm looking for somebody for my master's thesis called Flow. Anybody know somebody? And this guy recommended me, and doing Flow went viral as a little Flash web browser game online. And then Sony found it and said, we want to sign the guy that made this to a 3-game deal. And those 3 games ended up being Flow, Flower, and Journey. And so, you know, I did Flow. I was still going to undergrad classes, and I was working on a PS3 launch title by night because they started this company. And it was all this one guy who I just met at a concert, who then recommended me to a classmate of his. So Flow was an inside baseball kind of hit. If you were not like following the super esoteric, weird indie games, you would never have heard of Flow, even though it was a PlayStation exclusive and like a proper Sony game. It was the smallest imaginable Sony game. It was made by fucking students, basically. But it was successful enough that they went on to make Flower. They were able to have a little bit bigger budget. Flower was a little bit bigger of a hit. So then they were able to grow that. And then they were able to make Journey. And then Journey was the one that just none of us expected it to explode the way that it did. I mean, it just, we believed in it as a piece of creativity, but it was like, I don't know if that will translate to anything commercial whatsoever, because it's still pretty esoteric. So point being, there was years of history baked in.
Yeah.
You know, Sony trusted me because they already knew me from Flow. And I had to fight like hell to get that job, even though I was remaking a score I already did, because they were like, well, you know, we don't know you. We know some guys that can do some synthy, you know, Brian Eno-y kind of stuff. And like, that was what they were sure they wanted. So I know this is a very unhelpful answer, because it's like, well, you just need to know the right people.
Yeah.
And that's that. And we never know who the right people are. Chris, I don't mean to dominate. You've got a million good stories along these lines, and I'll just shut up and let you chime in.
It's the same story, though. It really, I mean, they're all the same story, which is, you know, I scored, you know, I ended up being next door neighbors and fraternity brothers with a guy from Ohio named Eric Kripke, and we just went to parties together. And he and our other friend said, "Oh, we're, you know, the film school has keggers on Thursday nights down in the lobby between the 2 buildings. You should come down." And I came down, and I was the only composer there. And all of a sudden, I started meeting all their friends who were filmmakers, and I started doing all their student films. And that guy Eric ends up being the guy who creates Supernatural and now The Boys, and you know, and he's one of my best friends. And that, you know, that led to tons of stuff. And the same kind of thing happened with. You know, the only thing that's probably maybe different about my experience was that, you know, besides those 3 or 4 filmmakers, a guy, you know, literally the guy who show runs Lost in Space, Zach Estrin, he was the same year as me and Eric at USC. And I didn't do any of his student films because I didn't know him all that well then, but I knew his girlfriend who became his wife. And so we stayed in touch a lot, and then we became friends. But the only difference for me is I was lucky enough to do, you know, for 4 years, I was Basil Polidoris's assistant. And when I first got out of school, and then I was Michael Kamen's assistant, and then I ended up orchestrating for Kamen on 2 movies. So, you know, that gave me a little bit of a different perspective, you know, and obviously that's, you know, a good way to kind of get into it is to kind of do what even Austin was talking about with that Lydecker did with Brian, where you start as an assistant or a programmer to someone who's doing games or whatever it is you want to do, and then you end up bailing them out when they literally are not going to, you know, finish something in time, or they get 2 jobs at the same time and they can't get it done, and you know, and they, you know, and you've been working for them, and they're like, oh great, can you write, you know, a bunch of extra cues for this thing so we can finish on time, and then you'll do that for a couple of years, whatever it is, and that's, you know, that's what Dara, my co-writer on Barb and Star, you know, she was my assistant for a long time, and every year she did more and more additional music, and it was finally Barb and Star was the final thing where we could actually, you know, throw some weight around and be like, well, the only way we're going to do this is if we can both get credit, and that's the way we were able to do it. And so, I mean, I would say certainly that's a big suggestion is, you know, find some people to work for. But the other thing too is, in one sense, you're in a tough spot because you're not in LA or New York where they do a lot of stuff. But in the other sense, there's the positive, the fact that it's probably not as oversaturated as LA and New York, which is just out of control. So my guess is there's a couple of great film schools in Chicago that you'd probably be able to hook up with. I don't know how many of them have interactive or gaming programs, but I'm assuming by now they do.
I can't imagine any major city not.
Yeah, I'm sure they're doing some games there.
So probably getting in contact with like film students around the area and like maybe gaming students, if there are any, is a pretty good route to go. Just kind of make those connections and then see, how they, snowball into something else.
Absolutely.
You can almost think of it like,
absolutely.
If you, like, here's my weirdly Shark Tanky analogy. I don't know why this occurs to me, but if you there's a lot of billionaires in the world who were the Series A investor on something that became, Uber or Amazon or something, where, in other words, somebody looked at somebody who was basically nobody and said, I'm willing to take a bet on you, and I'm willing to invest in the long term with you, because it's one thing for you to try to land a job with somebody that has already made 5 games or shipped, or has 10 years of showrunner practice, showrunner experience in television behind them or whatever. That's you're competing now with all the people they've met all that time, which is going to be people like Chris, who already are bringing a professional pedigree to the table that's going to be basically impossible to compete with. In fact, I remember reading an interview with your former boss, Basil Polidoris, where someone asked him for advice, and he said, just remember, you're never competing with me. Like, it's like the geologic column, he's in a different strata, and it's not that he's inherently better. It's just that everyone kind of moves in a semi-generational way where the folks that you want to meet are your counterparts, the game developer who is going, I hope there's a composer out there that's willing to take a chance on my little experiment. And then, of the 100 of those that you do, 3 of those people or 1 of those people will make a game that turns out to be this thing that turns a lot of heads and opens up a lot of doors for them. And they're say, hey, I want you to meet, you go to a party, I want you to meet my composer, where this is someone who stood with me when I was nothing, I was nobody, that's everything of my career until you reach a point that your work has sort of been heard by people who aren't your friends and your parents. That's essentially the only way careers get launched. Obviously, someone like Chris, walking into any film studio, they're going to be familiar with his body of work at this point. And so even though probably a relationship will still be the reason for walking in that room, there's not as much risk because I've seen 10 movies this guy scored. And, I obviously I recognize that I have a sort of similar position in video games where I've worked with most every major publisher at this point. And if I walk into a room, I almost never am in that room because they just randomly call me out of the blue. I'll know somebody who recommended me, but at least I've got a foundation of track record that they won't just immediately cross my name back off the list. And it takes time. The one variable to remember is that, some people are like David Arnold, where their student connections lead to high profile projects virtually overnight. And then there's people like John Williams who are in their 40s before anyone has ever even remotely heard of anything that they're doing outside of a few industry insiders, and every variation in between. Not in the world of film or video games or anything, but one of my teachers when I was at USC was the composer Morten Lauritsen, who is one of the most performed composers alive today, specializing in choral music. And his career explosion happened in his 50s. Until he wrote O Magnum Mysterium, no one ever even heard of him. And then suddenly from 50 onward, he was a choral music rock star.
Yeah, Dire Ton and O Magnum, those were the 2 ones that I remember singing. Yeah, those were
gorgeous.
Yeah,
of course.
and he had 50 years of being Morton Lauritsen before any of that happened. You know what I mean? So it's one of those where it's never a very satisfying answer, because it's not like, oh, go there and do this. It's basically like, just try to live your life and find ways to keep the bills paid and the lights on while you just keep meeting people. And I would add to that, I'm sure Chris, you would agree, your story with Eric and Supernatural perfectly validates it without even needing you to guarantee it, is it's not networking. It's actually caring about people and meeting them and treating them as you would anyone else, not as a gateway to work, but just, you're my actual friend. I actually care for you. I would go to your wedding. I would pick you up at night if your car broke down. I would come to your kid's birthday and bring a thoughtful present because I actually know you. That's different than this networky, I'd like to get to know you as long as I can figure out that there's some sort of pathway in it for me. I mean, I have director friends that I know I'll never work for. They've got somebody, but they're a friend of mine because of the other reasons people are friends, which we somehow forget about in these conversations, that just essentially just make friends knowing that some subset of those people may end up having work opportunities for you. And if they do, that's a bonus to the friendship, not this work opportunity got as a bonus a friend out of it.
Yep. And I think the other thing that Austin would probably agree with me on, because you already mentioned the sort of like oversaturation situation. And one of the things that, I think I know we're both believers in, because that's why he started a Kickstarter, and that's why I am writing a musical, and that's why all this other stuff is, because I did for a decade when I got out of school, I did the film equivalent of you're talking about, all this stuff, and I would find out every movie that was in production, and I would send envelope. Back then we had to send actual CDs and envelopes. I never got one call, like literally probably 800 mailers.
You said you would do the equivalent of cold calling. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, cold calling. And I would call and I would do it. Never, nothing ever came from any of that. And the music wasn't terrible. I don't know that it was amazing either at that point. I don't know how great my demo was. Now that I am, in all honesty, it was probably fine. But with no relationship, fine is going to get you nowhere, especially a fine cold call, because you're going to get whatever. So the one thing that I think Austin and I both believe in, and that's why we have the agent we have and all that kind of stuff, is like, if you can find a way to stand out, do it. Like, no matter what it takes. And it might not work the first time. The great story I have was, so I was up for Wreck-It Ralph, right? And I had credits and I had everything. And I went out and I hired somebody. I wrote a piece, and then I hired somebody to do a sort of faux 8-bit video game on an iPad that sort of loaded up automatically on an iPad and put it in. And I bought like 10 of these like mini video game, old school Pac-Man kind of things. And I made basically 10 little video games with my demo piece on it, scoring like a faux trailer for this thing that you could actually play with the joystick. And I spent probably $3,000 or $4,000 on credit cards, and I sent them to every producer and the music supervisor and the director and everybody. Obviously, I didn't get Wreck-It Ralph, but the people at Disney still talk about that whenever I talk to them. It's like, I still can't believe you did that. That was crazy. All of a sudden they showed up and there was this thing with you, and they still hired Henry Jackman, is what it is. But everybody at Disney remembers that and loves me now. And it literally hasn't paid off at Disney, but it's paid off with that music supervisor, and it's paid off with other people. So
it also just broadcasts the kind of guy that you are. And that's half the battle. Is the reason people spend so much time vetting composers is wanting to know what sort of person are we going to be getting in a kind of intimate, high pressure situation with. And even if you don't get the job, they know they learn a lot about you from doing that, and in a way that will only help, because it's like, they know that this is a cool guy, just fundamentally, just in a very basic way. This is someone who knows how to be fun, someone who doesn't take themselves so seriously that, they would consider doing all of this to somehow be a waste, or somehow, a fool's errand, or something. Like somebody that's just, and someone also that obviously gets the material. And I feel like there's so much to learn, even if they never even saw it, even if they just heard secondhand, oh, this guy sent a thing. And yeah, it's like, I never knew that story. That's fantastic. Yeah. And sometimes those things do pay off, is that obviously it's crucially worth mentioning, you know, for every.
But regardless, it'll get you noticed and it'll get you remembered. Yeah. Especially when you're coming not from LA or New York and you're coming from you don't have big credits yet. It's like that. You want to be that thing that's like, holy crap, what's that? I got 9. You want that, whoever that game, whether it's a producer or audio director, whoever you're trying to get to, you want them to go, I got 97 submissions for this game. I already kind of think I know who I want. I got 97 submissions, and 96 of them were links to Real Crafter or links to an audio file on SoundCloud or maybe a YouTube video. But the 97th one was a link to a completely fabricated magazine article about this composer and his process of, with behind the scenes still photos of this composer with the weirdest instrument you've ever heard of, that that looks like a conch shell from South Africa, and the reason they picked it, and so it's one of those things where it's like, it's part of that whole thing that goes, that's the only one he's going to remember, that one, and then he's going to remember the guy or girl who got hired because they already knew the audio director. But but the other 95 are literally not even a blip. So I guess that's my long-winded way of saying, when you do have when your foot does kick the door open just a little bit on something that exists, like, rather than do the shotgun approach of I'm going to send 900 demos and cold calls, latch on to those 3 or 4 every month and do something really unique and sort of eye-opening to sort of get their attention. And I think that's probably time better spent.
Okay. Yeah. Like this guy wrote a concerto for Waterphone or something like that. It's just like,
even that, honestly, even that's not weird enough. Like, it'd be more like, like finding out that you say there's the audio director, and you can do some research on that audio director, and you find out that audio director grew up in Seattle, and he is probably my age, and he really loved grunge and Nirvana. You find out from like some article that was written about them, they loved grunge. And so your demo should now be a rearrangement of a Nirvana song with like a Kronos quartet, string quartet thing.
Okay. Yeah.
And that would be your pitch would be like, and even not that the music for the game needs to be that, but it's like, you found out something about this person by doing research that, like, he's going to listen to that because he already loves that kind of music and that's his favorite thing. And now you're doing this weird composery thing with it. So my guess is that kind of thing would be the kind of thing that would make people go, ooh, wait, that guy's, first of all, real creative. Second of all, a go-getter. Third of all, did some research. Yeah. All 3 of which are good.
That's cool. People want to know. I remember it was very surprising 20 years ago when the news broke that Howard Shore would be scoring the Lord of the Rings films, because he was overwhelmingly known for horror. Yep. And it was like, how in the hell did they choose Howard Shore? And then I started hearing these stories about how, he flew to New Zealand with an annotated copy of the books because he's like, I have a lifelong obsession with Lord of the Rings, and I can show you on page 73 that when they sing in Elvish, I would do it this. And it was like the sheer amount of obsession that they witnessed made them realize, okay, this is somebody that is just firing on all cylinders for what we're making. And that's a very powerful thing. If you're trying to choose who to entrust this, especially music, where they're always a little bit afraid of it because they don't really know how it works. They don't really know, is it going to yield the predictable results that we're aspiring to? Is it going to be exciting enough? Is it going to be this? It's hard to manage. It's a slightly more amorphous thing. And so they're just knowing that someone is this obsessed with the thing that is being made.
Yeah.
Is, you know, I mean, I had that on when I was asked about Assassin's Creed, and you know, I had to demo for that job, and I had been an avid player of that whole franchise up to that point, so I was able to walk into those meetings with, you know, an enormous amount of pre-existing knowledge and say, oh, you know, I noticed that 2 games ago you guys were doing this, and it seems like you've been evolving away from this and that. I'm curious, and it was like they were obviously dealing with somebody that knew what they were making, and was excited to look for ways to, you know, build on the parts that were really working and push forward into new areas. And that, as it turned out, was what they were looking for. So, and you know, and sometimes it'll be, all of this will not be like Chris said, you know, the person who's already friends with the audio director may still end up getting the job because, or I've certainly had it happen before as well, where, you know, I said, okay, I'm going to take a crazy ass wild swing. And then it comes back of just, this is very much not what we're looking for, but it was sort of memorably wrong. It was like, no one ever sent a demo like that. Holy shit. That was fucked up, man.
I would, and I've heard Richard, our one of our agents, say this before, but like, you know, if you're going to submit for something so long, you'd rather be the person like that they're all talking about. Oh my God, do you believe they sent us like a, you know, a Steely Dan kind of like whack 8-tonal Steely Dan with string quartet version? That is completely wrong. I'd rather be that person than the 37th remote control sound alike. Yeah. That sounds kind of like a watered down Inception for the 4,000th time, because that's not gonna, you know, no one's gonna remember that.
Yeah, the way
so I think he's right about that.
Yeah, the way I like to frame it is my job is to make life easy for them. So either I make them instantly want to hire me or instantly not want to hire me. And either way,
that's a great one.
They're sifting through 1,000 demos. If they can cross me off the list or circle me, I've helped them. And I like the idea of helping them. Especially because having made my own little small productions and, you know, experimenting with creating, you know, short films and things like that. And anytime you solicit the world for demos, I've really developed an empathy for the position that these people are in, because, you know, I'll say, does anybody know any 2D animators? I'm working on a thing, I could use a 2D animator, and I'll get 5,000 2D animators all of a sudden. And you're like, fuck, I don't even know how to choose, you know, kind of like this and kind of like that. And it's powerful insight into just how tricky it can be for them. And it's no wonder they're going to go, well, I know this person. That makes this real simple.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's the easiest way.
It's funny, the premise of this was to focus on giving musical feedback, but I hope this, can I play back your music and we can just throw some thoughts your way real quick? Because I do.
Well, it'll have to do with this too anyway, because it'll be nice to hear that and go, okay, so we hear where you're coming from musically. This is how you maybe adapt the things you're good at and add a little bit of this special sauce of promotional craziness or whatever.
Yeah,
you know?
Either way, I still think that I mean, all the advice and everything that you've given is really useful. And it's, you know, I think it's still something that, you know, even young composers and people who are looking at getting into the whole industry of, like, you know, gaming or even, you know, movies or TV, it's still useful for them to hear, because it's like, oh, that's a unique idea. And like, that's a great way for me to stand out, you know, from all of these other people who I'm competing with. You know, that's something that maybe they haven't thought of. I mean, some of it certainly is stuff that is like, oh, I haven't even considered that. That's a great idea. So I still appreciate that.
Good.
It's tempting to, in the interest of trying to maximize your initial opportunities, it's tempting to try to make yourself this Swiss Army knife that just is sort of as bland and replaceable as possible, because that means theoretically, oh yeah, I can do your thriller, I can do your romantic comedy, I can do your this or that or that. And I thought that way when I was at the beginning as well, you know, especially because my heroes, like I would look at composers like Jerry Goldsmith, who really could do it all. And I think I want to be like that. And I remember once, I think it was doing a panel, or I can't remember if I was in the audience or on the panel, funny enough, but I remember Tyler Bates said something that I'll never forget, where he goes, if you can get pigeonholed, that means you're the guy they're going to come to for every time they're doing that thing. They're going to come to you again and again and again. Then those relationships, those directors and whomever else, game directors, they'll then want to start branching out and take you with them. But if you can essentially become a cliche that is always the person called for this, because that was his career arc. You know, he was the kind of grungy record producer turned, you know, very like driving, grungy's not the right term, but like more like metal.
Industrially.
And yeah, you
metal
know, he was like
industrial,
Marilyn Manson kind of stuff. Quite literally, and then, you know, people like Zack Snyder and James Gunn taking notice of that, and then that led to him doing, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy. Now he's one of the Marvel composers, but initially it was just, this is the perfect guy for horror and, you know, those like Resident Evil type action movies that they normally give to the Charlie Clouser type people, and you know, and he thrived by being typecast and then just playing the long game. And that was actually, I remember thinking that's actually pretty profound advice.
Yep, so, it really is.
I mean, and Lennertz is actually perfect demonstration of that with the yet another talking animal movie opening now. You know, no one can do talking animals quite like you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's 1,000, but it's like it's like talking animals in comedies, but then, you know, it's like Austin said, you know, the only reason I got The Boys, which is a hard R, super violent superhero thing, I'm sure if the only reason I got it was because it's Eric Kripke and he's my guy.
Right.
Yeah. I guarantee you I wouldn't have gotten that job if it was just an open call, because they would have been like, oh, that's the comedy guy that's typecast in Talking Animal and you know, and silly you know, rom-com stuff, whatever. But because it's Eric, he's like, no, this guy can do it. He's my guy, you know, and that's where it came from. So I think this whole idea of like get known for something to the point where you've got steady work and you got good relationships with the people you're working with. And then those people will, as Austin said, take you into different spaces.
Okay. That's cool.
Let me play.
All right, let's play this thing.
Some music. Here we go. Quick question. That fade out at the end, was this like a loop or something that you, I see.
Yeah, it was created as a loop. So then it would, that's about where the loop is restarting.
Yeah, got it.
So it's supposed to be for this collectible trading card game stuff where you do battles with these cards. And so they needed some battle music. So I created 2 different themes, and that was one of the ones that I had created and was supposed to loop.
You about to say something, Chris?
Cool. I mean, you already know what my first comment's going to be, which is exactly what you just said, which is it sounds like a lot of stuff that we've heard. And it's, well, you know, there's a lot of good stuff about it. There's a lot of, you know, epicness and, you know, lushness and that kind of stuff. My first and most blatant, like, suggestion would be like, if you're going to use this on demos, I'd remix it and probably, if you still have the MIDI, go through it and do some real controller work to make, make all the instruments sound a little bit more like they're swelling and it's not quite so, static. But then I'd find I on your melody sections, it'd be worth a ton to hire maybe a female vocalist. And I mean, there's a smidge of sort of Celticness in there. You could always, you do some wood, you do penny whistle or some stuff like that. You could certainly, I'm trying to think of like single instrument or two or three that you could put in to sort of be your melodic instrument. First of all, to take the ears away from the samples, but second of all, to be something that would be unique, whether it's a vocal or a unique, a unique woodwind instrument, or hell, I would even say, do like a electric cello thing, and with like distortion and echo, and have that be your lead to sort of take it into a place that you're like, oh, it's a battle thing. And yes, it lives in the world that everyone's battle stuff lives in, but there's this lead element that's not on everybody else's, that's sort of unique. And I think that would be the quickest way to take this kind of a piece into something that I think would stand out and get you.
That's cool.
To say, oh, okay, let's talk to this guy some more.
Yeah, the way I heartily agree. The way that I would like my version of saying what is effectively the same thing is, I don't, and I find myself saying these words all the time. I don't hear you taking a risk musically. I feel
like I said, it's a very cliche track to like kind of fit what the game developer was asking for. And so he would send me samples and he's like, can you kind of make it sound like this? And I was like, yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and try to match what you were doing. So it was me trying to appease him. And so, yeah, there's, like I said, it's very cliche, as opposed to like one of the wind ensemble pieces that I wrote is called Funkzilla, Rumble in Neo Tokyo. And it combines elements of
it's already very promising,
like traditional Japanese music with funk music, since they both use
it. I love that. Right.
And it's definitely more adventurous. If I would have been able to actually choose something that wasn't, video game related, that's what I would have really chosen, because it's definitely something that made me stand out with a publisher.
Let me poke that right there. When you say video game related, video games won't grow unless we have composers willing to try crazy shit. It's kind of my whole career is built around trying to, anytime someone says, well, okay, we really want it to be like this, and they play some very normal reference, I'll say, okay, we can definitely fall back on that. Let's try something first, and I will not fault you if it's too weird. And 9 times out of 10, they like that better because they've not heard it.
Yep.
And as long as you understand, as long as you're not being weird for weird's sake, and you're still scoring the whatever it is, the scene, the gameplay, the whatever. Yeah. You're not just randomly throwing music over the fence, in other words, but it's still informed by what they're trying to make. Everyone's always gonna. Nothing would please a director more than knowing that every composer is now copying what their composer wrote. That what a point of pride for them to know they directed the composer into creating something that was influential. Well, you don't become by being the 400th person to do X or Y. This is the Hans Zimmer secret, right? He's always conceiving of these kind of bold little, and it's always usually a very simple concept. I know, how about space travel? We feature a cathedral organ in a really prominent way. That's a one sentence, that's like the equivalent of, well, what if it's a movie about talking animals? Like it's a simple concept, and yet it's powerful, and especially well executed. Obviously that's key part of it. But yeah, so I'm always looking for what's the thing that freaks me out and makes me think, ooh, people might not like this because it's a little bit scary. I don't know that I can point to a reference of something that's done quite this, that would make it feel familiar and palatable and whatnot. And so you have tapped into a conundrum of sometimes you are hired to do a very specific thing. What that means is those pieces probably won't end up on the demo reel. That's okay. You're a professional. You're delivering exactly what was asked of you. I have gone before, and if I wrote something that was part of the way there, curious if you've ever done this, Chris. I'd be shocked if you haven't. If you wrote like, okay, it's a big battle scene, and they weren't happy with it until I felt like I was just doing all the cliche things. And then this other project came along where I took all my percussion stems out of that battle thing because they sounded like $1 million, and then I added fucking Bulgarian voices over top of them or whatever.
Yep.
And now I've got my demo piece.
Yeah, I totally do that all the time. And that I guess that would be my going back to what your original sort of question was about, like, how do you get people to give you, to hire you for jobs that aren't, freebies or whatever else. And I would say, like, load your demo up, even if you think you know exactly what that game should sound like in a cliche way. Like, I still would go with Austin's theory of, like, let's throw the wackiest shit at them. And if you want to bury, like I said, you could turn this track into something a little bit more unique with, like, a couple of lead instruments doing your melodies that are unexpected. And that can be your safety. That can be, track 2 or track 3, but, like, start it out with the craziest thing in the world. And then you can give them this one as track 2. And then you can do another, like, Funkzilla thing. And then after that, because, the chances still are you're going to get the paid gig when the person hears that thing that nobody else has on their demo, and they're like, I'm going to get that guy. That guy's the only guy that wrote something that was interesting for me.
Yeah. That's
and now they're going to, and then you have the thing like, well, I'm the guy you want, so you have to pay me something. Whereas if there's, like you said, if there's 96 demos for a game and they want something cliche and all 96 are exactly what they're expecting, then they're gonna pick the one that's free, because why would they pay for something if they can get it for free? Yeah. But if you're the only one offering Funkzilla, and again, it's the likelihood of you getting, it makes the field narrower, because you have to go for, how many games are really going to be able to, or how many things are going to be able to handle something like that. But when you find the one that does, they're gonna be like, no, that's our guy, and we got to get him, and that you want to be in that position more often than you want to be like we said, that sort of like shotgun approach, jack of all trades thing, I think.
Yeah.
We hear so often about the notion of a composer offering to do a thing for free is this inevitable race to the bottom. And it's like the only time people will ever choose somebody for free is if they have no other specific criteria that's going to be more important to them. Where, in other words, the music clearly isn't the thing that they really, really care about, because as soon as somebody does something interesting that they like, but says, it's going to cost you, unless they just truly have no budget, which of course those projects exist, but they would rather have the thing that they want. And only in a situation of being truly just uninspired are they going to feel like, oh, okay, well, free is better. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, never.
Quoting our endless, bottomless pit of sage advice agent Richard Kraft, it's like, if it was genuinely a race to the bottom, then people like Danny Elfman and John Powell would not have had careers, because they ain't cheap, and yet they're thriving. So it's the free thing is I think it's very often looked at in a very overly reductive lens. Like, if, being free often doesn't, very few people that have genuinely figured out how to do something profoundly unique are also doing that thing for free.
Yeah.
That's a really rare combo of somebody that's just like this genius that goes, I'll do it for free. Because if they did, they would be because there's just not a lot out there that stands out.
Yeah. And I, Austin and I both are well, we've both done tons of things for free. I still do things for free all the time.
Me too.
For my friends and for friends of them, for their friends, and 9 times out of 10, I end up do stuff free with, and many of them go on to then pay me very well, and some of them don't, and it's fine either way. But I think, you know, as someone who's trying to make more, as Austin said from the beginning, when you're trying to make more connections and develop relationships, you know, that the quickest way to make relationships is to say yes, and to just do work. And so a lot of that at the beginning is going to be free or close to free. But the quicker you do that, the quicker you'll start getting paid, I think. If that makes any sense.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Chris, I really want to be aware of your time, and I don't want to overextend myself here. If you're
I probably also need to
yeah, if you're down with listening for a few minutes of this other track, so we can just leave a few words for our friend Adonis to hear later of just a reaction.
I would love to, because I feel like I know him so well from online that I've got to hear it.
Did meet him in person one time, I think only once.
Did you?
Yeah, I remember Richard's like TED conference that he put on at the
Yep.
Broad Theater.
Oh, was he at that?
He flew out for that to help. Just that's
Nice.
part of what put him on Richard's radar, is he just said, "Can I volunteer?" and flew himself from fucking Greece or wherever he was living to be.
And there you go.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So anyway, so for context, Jeremy, this is a guy who works a lot in library music and kind of earns his living from getting placements in TV and things like that and he's one of these guys that just prolifically writes mountains of music. And so I'll read you the email that he sent over with this piece. He basically just says, any feedback, don't hesitate to kick my ass, he says. He says, history on this track is I was recently asked by one of the libraries I work with to do a bunch of music. Comes as no surprise, in the style of the Queen's Gambit. They're always chasing whatever's just struck the nerve, you know?
Right.
So he says, I did 3 tracks in that vein, and then I just did this last one for me using that template. So this is actually just basically he built the session to try to mirror the production quality of that show, but then wrote his own thing. So this is not, I think, deliberately in that vein.
But just in that template.
But it's kind of, that piano and strings and anyway, so I haven't listened to it. I'm just gonna hit play.
Awesome.
And then we'll chat about it, and then I'll let you go.
was terrible. No, not at all.
Adonis. You want to kick us off? I certainly have some thoughts.
No, well, I started last one. You do this one.
Fair enough. My funny enough, my reaction was sort of similar. I didn't bring it up, but when listening to your piece, Jeremy, it was interesting how for the first 2/3 of it, you played to the strengths of the samples, and so it wasn't sort of distractingly sampley, and then at some point you switched to a slightly more melodic sensibility, and then suddenly it was like neon signs flashing, these are samples, and this piece had the same exact effect on me. It just happened a lot earlier, where the piano and like the one lone solo violin that gives way to the string section, I was like, ooh, that's all nice, very well handled. And then as soon as the oboe came in or whatever, it started screaming sample libraries at me in a way that was disquieting. And that's just one of those, like, I'm a believer in this pure sense of don't write to the strength of the samples, because the samples are designed to do a very limited skill set of things. And that's what leads to everybody's music sounding the same if you're doing only that which the samples are good at. But I say that when I'm speaking from a luxury of knowing I'll be replacing it with live instruments later. So I can write, if I'm doing a thing that I know we have a session booked, I will write stuff where the mock-up sounds janky as hell, and I'll do my best to mask it, or I'll apologetically inform the producers or whomever, I know this is a little iffy, but I assume I got this job at least in part because I've proven that the final result won't sound like this. And you have to navigate that case by case, but if it's a thing where I know it's going to be the final product, then you really do have to write to the things that the samples really sound best doing, because otherwise it's just a piece that sounds, my ear can't not hear that as a mock-up. I don't hear it as a piece. I hear it as, oh, this is a thing that later will be something else. And this one was weird because it was like if you've ever seen an artist work on an oil painting where they might make pencil sketches on the canvas and then they start painting, where you're like looking at it halfway through, where half is this gorgeous oil and then the other half looks like pencil on canvas, because it's sort of, there were certain elements of the production that were perfectly great, really nice. And right alongside them would be things that were screaming at me mock-up. And so it was like this odd, like mutant that's like 50% flowing Fabio hair and 50% like Smeagol. If that analogy makes any sense.
I love that analogy. That's funny.
Dear Chris, anything? Do you disagree with any of that, or
no, not at all, not at all. I mean, that was sort of this blatant thing that I would say is I'd love to hear either find a way to make the woodwinds and the higher melodic material speak better, different samples or better programming or whatever, or you got to replace them, I would say. But I think the one thing I would say, I really love I like a lot of the textural stuff of it. I wish the melodic stuff made a more prominent appearance, because it all felt melodic, but it didn't, like, I didn't know what the melody was exactly. I just kind of know what world it lives in, and I feel like my brain's sort of like doing whatever. And the way I would say that is like this piece, because of the sort of the textures and the smartness of it, like it felt like it wanted to go that next step and become like a really great, one of those really great like Rachel Portman pieces from like Cider House, or one of those things, yeah, where it's very, sort of British and smart and whatever, but it still has that like unmistakable simplistic melody that it sets up with all this like nice, these sort of like lush arpeggios and stuff. But then when it gets time to the melody, Rachel is she's so good at like, okay, now's the time, and I'm gonna peel away all the frill. I'm gonna peel away the frill, and I'm just gonna present this thing, and then I'll take it into some variations, and I'll start. But the first statement of her melody is on a lot, like Cider House and Benny and June, but those kind of things.
So simple.
So simple, but that's what I feel like. I felt like I loved the intro, and then I felt like I wanted a much more simple and unvarnished, like straight ahead melody, and then you can sort of bring back in all of the frilliness and the orchestrations once my ear is like picked up on, like, here's this 8-bar melody or whatever it is. That would just be my suggestion of making it so you can hook onto it.
You just spurred a thought that I can't believe I don't think I've ever had this thought before, but you just kind of gave me a clue into writing that I've somehow never had before. That an analogy that I think it could be helpful to bear in mind is, when you walk into a really crowded party and there's just that crowd roar of noise, and someone across the room goes, "Chris," and you hear it, you can clock their voice saying your name despite the chaos, and yet you can't hear any individual thing anyone else is saying. It's just kind of this wall of static, and then somehow this one thing cuts through because you know what that thing is. You're deeply familiar. It's grained into you. You've heard the word Chris probably more than any other single word in your whole life. And so it's like, if you think of the melody that way, where it's just, no matter how crazy the situation gets, if it's been something that's so established, this is where Williams is just such the master, right? Yep. Like, his action cues are so concerto for orchestra in nature, but yet those 4 notes or whatever will stand out because we've been subjected to them so many times that they're the voice in the crowd. They're hearing our name spoken back to us in a densely packed room. I think that you're really spot on, and I think that your piece, Jeremy, actually could benefit from a similar way of thinking. Like, you have that melody that you throw around, the brass, the horns in particular. I remember that's kind of a slightly arpeggiated, sort of like da na nia na sort of thing. I remember, but it unadorned, anthemic. Think of giving it, up front, very exposed before.
How do you say too many notes? Kind of.
Well,
and I get that
too much going on.
I get beat up for that all the time,
Yes. Yeah. Same. Yeah. Exactly.
Do you think of a texture in certain parts where it's like, if you scaled back the orchestration and let the prominent points actually kind of stand out, then it makes a dramatic sort of difference from the more epic sort of sounding parts to the elements that are going to be more thematic and sort of like musical and melodic.
The trap we fall into as composers all the time is we spend a lot of time on like 1 bar of music. So we've heard every component part of that 1 bar. So it just feels like, well, yeah, of course I know what the flutes are doing and what the violas are doing and what the this and that are doing, because you've spent all the time. But for the audience, it goes and it's gone. And so it's like we sometimes we get lost in the verticality of what we're doing, and we forget the linearity of what we're doing. And the real masters are the ones that seem to just never forget what it's like to be a cold listen audience member that's never heard this before, and they dole it out, something that they all have in common, no matter their style, no matter how, James Newton Howard, Jerry Goldsmith, Danny Elfman, John Williams, Basil, Michael Kamen. These composers have very little overlap in what makes them them. Like, they all have craft, of course, but their personalities are quite different. You would never confuse their writing for each other's, but that's something that they all tend to, just state it up front. If it matters, make it really easy to follow, that kind of thing.
I would agree with that.
Well, thanks again for doing this, Chris. Any last question, Jeremy, that this is spurred on? I hate to just leave you open-handed if something's burning.
No, I don't think so. I mean, that was all really good advice. Like I said, the biggest question I had was kind of getting into the whole area of writing for games, movies, etc. And like, how do you really make yourself stand out? Is you guys kind of tackled that question, like, I think really well. So you had some really great advice
Glad to hear it.
I think extremely beneficial. So if you do share this, I'm hoping that a lot of other composers who are kind of in my boat as well take that and really take it to heart and just kind of like, okay, that's really good advice. This is a great way for me to actually kind of stand out and, make myself kind of known to these other people, like, who are going to be listening to my music.
I think it's also just important to never forget about having patience, and it can be hard and it can be frustrating and it can feel like you're banging your head against a wall. But the literally the one thing that every successful composer has ever had in common, by definition, is that they didn't quit before they became successful. Which is an obvious kind of tautology, right? Like, all I've said is A equals A, but it's an easy thing to overlook, because you realize some of these people struggled for 30 years before they made it. And all we don't know about the 30 years before that. We never hear about that. So it's easy to just pretend that didn't happen, but they had to live that. They had to every morning wake up going, how come my friend over there is, so much more successful than I am? And we showed up to LA the same day, or whatever, or it's so easy to get lost in all the noise of that crap and only look at these case studies of people, whose success we feel like we understand. We almost never fully do.
I've written a couple blog posts for my website, and one of the things that I had to kind of do is like a sort of introspective look was like not compare myself to other composers, because like I would always do that, like check out and I'm like, where was this composer at this time in their life? Like this person was already doing this, they were getting commissions, and it's like, what? Sometimes you have a different voice, you have a different sort of path, and a different speed for how you're doing things. And that was one of the biggest things that kind of helped me realize that is, it's like, I don't need to compare myself to other people, because, even if I find just the slightest modicum of like success and I enjoy what I'm doing, that's all that really kind of matters to me. I mean, you'll face rejection constantly, and it's something that you kind of learn to deal with, but you grow from it and you learn from those experiences, and, just never giving up, like you were talking about. That's the biggest thing until you find that success, whatever you're looking for. So,
and that's not easy. It's not, I don't mean to trivialize it. Like, it can be very tempting to go, fuck this. I'm sick of this shit. Like, everyone's had those days of really feeling pretty run over, raked over the coals, but there's just so many examples of you hang in there. I'll never forget one last little anecdote, and then we can all enjoy our evenings, is a composer friend of mine who I've known forever, because we both had, little indie films that were kind of poking their head up in the festival circuit around the same time. This was well over 10 years ago. And it was like, exciting, hopefully, good luck, all that kind of thing. And then largely did not hear from this person for years and years and years. And then I hear a story of, they were at a wedding and they had this chance meeting with this big producer who's making a huge movie, and gave him a shot on this movie. And so then I see this person at the ASCAP dinner one night, and I'm like, hey, I hear you got this big thing coming out. And they go, I don't know. I'm having to rewrite every cue so many times that by the end, I don't know what's going to result from this thing. Then a short time later, I hear that person was fired off that film. And I thought, oh man, that was their shot to make it. What a fucking bummer that must be. Flash forward another year, and then the whole rest of the world goes, who the hell is this person? Because the right things fell into place, and they ended up scoring Captain Marvel, this Pinar Toprak I'm talking about. Where I
know exactly what, it was like, Geostorm and all that stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, remember, she was not feeling good about that score. And then they got rid of her, and it was like, she came that close. And then, but talk about if she had given up, if she had chose that moment to go, you know what? I spent all these years to get in the position of doing that movie, only to have it fall apart right in front of me. Fuck this. She's literally now the record holder of the highest box office earning for a woman composer ever. And off of one film, it's like in one film blew past Debbie Lurie and Rachel Portman.
Everybody,
It's unbelievable. And that it's the fortitude to just stay in the game, which is, it's hard. It's really hard. And I certainly am glossing over all parts of her story that I probably don't even know. So, yeah.
There was a record producer who, like, when the Beatles were first kind of coming up to light, they listened to the Beatles, and he was just like, we don't really like their sound, and we think that the guitar is kind of on the way out. And then they grew into this worldwide phenomenon. And I've even had that before, where I've submitted a piece to 4 different publishers, and it's been rejected by every single one. And then that 5th one, they pick it up, and it becomes like one of their better selling pieces. And it's
That happens all the
never
time.
know what's going to stick and where things are going to stand out. Sometimes it comes to personal preference for, whoever you're working for. But yeah,
it's not even that. Like the person just saying no could have just had their wife leave them earlier that morning or something. You know what I mean? Like it's something completely not to do with you.
I've had it before where the catalog was just too full of that style of piece that they thought, and we're like, no, or like, we're just not really interested in. And it's not a big deal. You just never take it personally and always look for that next step.
Yeah. And I mean, the concept of like, it's so subjective. And there is that, you want to find the people that you speak with, but like, it's like, when I think of it, like if Tim Burton or like say Tim Burton or Chris Nolan is making a movie and Alan Menken sent them 10 of his best pieces for a demo.
Yeah.
They would literally be like, what? But those are 10 fucking Alan Menken pieces.
Yeah.
And they're brilliant. And so when you send that to Disney, it's like the world's open up and the angels start singing. But if it's not the right match, it's not because that music isn't brilliant, and it's not because Chris Nolan and Tim Burton have bad taste. Neither one is true. It's perfectly, the thing that always helps me is like, it's perfectly possible that music is brilliant. They're brilliant filmmakers, and they just don't belong together. And that's literally the end of it. And when you look at it that way, you're like, oh, I don't feel so bad. Everything's fine, and I always have to remind myself of that, of like, you know what? I personally, I like I grew up then, of course, I'm a bigger fan of most 90s rap than I am of current rap. That's just what it is. A lot of people would disagree with me. Fine. And so it's just like, people like what they like. Yeah,
a lot of 90s hip hop though, like, had a lot of influences from jazz and like the sampling and stuff like that. I've gotten into debates with people about all this stuff, about why 90s rap music is so much better. I mean, like big pop,
unless you're brought up right now, in which case they're like, why are you listening to that old stuff?
Yeah, because it's good.
What it is.
Yeah. You can never.
I love that Menken example. To Chris Nolan, I'm going to steal that one for next time I find myself in a similar conversation, Chris, because that's fantastic. Like
it just makes so much sense. It makes it so much less painful.
Perfect demonstration of the reality of, a genius can talk to another genius, and it doesn't mean that they should be that there's an inherent chemistry there. I love it. I will, we ran over a fair amount. I really appreciate you making the time, Chris, Jeremy, thank you so much for subjecting yourself to this.
Yes, thank you.
It's no small thing to kind of open yourself up to any real-time feedback in that way. And so hats off to you. Appreciate you doing it. And I'll let you both know what I decide to do with it, video wise. And I wish you both excellent evenings.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You too.
Good luck, Jeremy.
Thanks so
and let Austin know how you're doing, and we'll all keep our eyes out.
All right, sounds good. Appreciate it. Thanks for the feedback.
You bet, man. Take care. Thanks, Austin.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Thank you.